At first glance, INFJs seem calm, thoughtful, and easy to be around. They're kind, good listeners, and they tend to avoid drama. But spend enough time around one, and something shifts. You start noticing that things don't roll off them like they do for others. Conversations that felt simple suddenly feel deep. Their reactions can be unpredictable. And you might begin to feel like you're being studied more than spoken to. That's when you realize being close to an INFJ can be a little maddening. INFJs don't try to drive people crazy. They're not manipulative. In fact, they care deeply about others and usually just want peace. But because of how their mind works, mixing intuition, emotional awareness, and deep reflection, they often end up confusing or frustrating the people around them. This isn't about flaws. It's about the way INFJs are wired. Their inner world is full of thoughts, feelings, and insights most people never see. And because that world runs so differently from the surface-level way most people operate, it creates friction. You could be having a casual conversation, and the INFJ picks up on something you didn't even realize you were hinting at. You could think they're fine, only to realize later they've been upset for days but never said a word. You could think they're warm and open, and then suddenly distant with no warning. It's not personal. They just have a complex way of moving through the world. This video breaks down 6 ways INFJs unintentionally drive others insane. These aren't dramatic behaviors or obvious personality quirks. These are subtle patterns, things INFJs do without realizing it. But that can slowly wear down even the most patient friends, partners, and co-workers. If you are an INFJ, this might help you understand why people sometimes seem irritated or confused around you, even when your intentions are good. And if you know one, it might give you the clarity you need to stop taking their behavior so personally. Let's start with the first way INFJs drive people up the wall, and they do it with something they're known for. Way number 1. They read too much into everything. ENFJs have minds that are always active, always watching, and always connecting dots. They're not the kind of people who just take things at face value. A simple comment, a casual look, a slightly different tone, all of it gets stored, sorted, and analyzed. And that's the first thing that drives people a little insane about them. You might say something with no deeper meaning, but an INFJ is already asking themselves, what did they really mean by that? They're thinking about your history, your tone, your mood, and what you didn't say. You may have been joking, venting, or just distracted, but the INFJ is building a full emotional profile from that single moment. It doesn't mean they're paranoid or insecure. It's just how they're wired. INFJs are constantly scanning for emotional undercurrents. They're sensitive to tension, subtle signs of disapproval, and changes in behavior. So while others move on from a moment, INFJs often carry it with them, turning it over in their minds again and again. This habit can drive others crazy. You may feel like you're walking on eggshells, unsure of how much to say or how they'll interpret it. It can feel like nothing is ever just simple with them, like every word has a hidden layer, even when you're not trying to be deep. And because INFJs are usually polite, they may not bring up their concerns right away. Instead, they let things pile up until they become overwhelmed or distant. By then, the other person has no idea what went wrong, because to them, nothing actually happened. This doesn't mean INFJs are wrong in how they interpret the world. Often, they are picking up on something real. But their constant analysis can leave others feeling over-examined or misunderstood. It's like being under a microscope when you just wanted to have a normal conversation. The irony is that INFJs do this because they care. They want to understand you. They want to connect with what you're really feeling. But in doing so, they sometimes overread things that weren't meant to be that deep. And that makes people feel tense around them, even when nothing is actually wrong. Way number 2, they are inconsistently expressive. Another way INFJs drive people crazy is by being inconsistent in how they communicate. One day they're fully present, engaged in deep conversations, emotionally available, and full of insight. The next day they might be quiet, distant, or even unreadable. To those around them, it feels like being yanked between warmth and mystery, and it's exhausting. This isn't about being moody or manipulative. It's usually a mix of emotional overload, internal processing, and the INFJ's deep need for balance. When they feel safe and grounded, they're open. They'll share thoughts, emotions, even their vulnerability. But when something feels off, when they're tired, overwhelmed, or sensing unspoken tension, they go inward. To others, this sudden shift feels confusing. You thought everything was fine, and now they've gone quiet. You try to talk, and they're unresponsive. You assume something is wrong, but they don't explain. That silence creates a sense of distance that can be hard to deal with, especially if you value open, steady communication. The problem is that INFJs often aren't aware of how much this confuses others. To them, if something feels heavy internally, they retreat. If the energy in a conversation feels off, they disconnect. But from the outside, it looks inconsistent, like you never know which version of them you're going to get. And because they tend to keep their processing private, they don't always explain what's happening. They might be thinking through a problem, nursing a past hurt, or sensing something about you they haven't fully figured out. But instead of talking it out, they stay quiet, assuming their silence is harmless. This unpredictability drives people insane because it creates emotional instability. You start to feel unsure. Are they mad at you? Did you say something wrong? Are they pulling away? And when you ask, they often say, "I'm fine," even when they're not. It's hard to connect deeply with someone who sometimes disappears emotionally without warning. The INFJ doesn't do it on purpose. It's how they protect themselves. But without explanation, it feels like emotional whiplash. And over time, even the most patient people can feel worn out by the push and pull of that emotional rhythm. Way number 3. They withdraw. Without explanation. One of the most frustrating things about being close to an INFJ is how they can suddenly pull away, emotionally, mentally, or even physically, without offering a clear reason why. One day, things feel close and connected. The next day, they're nowhere to be found. They may not reply to messages, they may cancel plans, or they may just seem off when you talk to them. This kind of silent withdrawal drives people nuts. Not because INFJs are doing it to hurt anyone, but because the people around them often don't know what triggered it. INFJs usually don't say, "I need space," they just go quiet. They step back. They disappear into themselves. The reason this happens is complicated. INFJs take in a lot emotionally. They absorb the energy in a room, they carry the weight of people's stories, and they often feel emotionally full long before anyone else realizes it. So when they reach that limit, they retreat. They need time alone to sort through everything they've taken in. The trouble is, they don't always communicate this need. They assume it's obvious. They assume people will understand. But to others, it feels confusing. It can feel like rejection. Like something went wrong and no one explained why. That lack of clarity creates stress, especially for people who rely on open, consistent communication. The people who care about INFJs often take this withdrawal personally. They might feel abandoned or ignored. They might wonder what they did wrong. But the truth is, it's rarely about the other person. It's about the INFJ trying to get back to center, to clear their mind and reset their emotions. INFJs don't mean to create distance, they just don't always know how to explain that they need it. And because they don't want to hurt anyone, they stay quiet instead of risking an awkward conversation. Unfortunately, that silence often causes more confusion than honesty would have. If you know an INFJ, the best thing you can do is respect that need for space, without assuming it's about you. And if you are an INFJ, learning to say, "I just need time to recharge," can save a lot of relationships from unnecessary tension. Way number 4, they hold high standards. INTFJs tend to hold themselves and others to incredibly high standards. They're not just looking for kindness or honesty. They want emotional depth, meaningful connection, shared values, and thoughtful communication. And while that might sound admirable, it can drive people absolutely insane. Here's why. Most people don't know they're being measured. INFJs often won't say anything when someone disappoints them. They'll smile, nod, and stay polite. But inside, they're keeping track. They notice when words don't match actions. They see when someone avoids truth or fails to grow. And over time, that gap between what they expect and what they get becomes too wide to ignore. What's brutal about this is that INFJs won't always explain their disappointment. They just start to emotionally detach. People around them sense that something's off, but they don't understand what changed. It feels like the INFJ just quietly gave up on the connection, and in a way, they did. The INFJ standards come from a place of depth. They know what it feels like to be seen, to be understood, to be in alignment with someone. And once they've had that kind of connection, it's hard to accept anything less. So when people give them surface-level interactions, or act in ways that feel dishonest or lazy, the INFJ withdraws, not out of anger, but out of disappointment. They also apply these standards to themselves, which creates even more pressure. They want to be consistent, emotionally responsible, and clear. So when others don't show the same care or thoughtfulness, it feels unfair, and sometimes even insulting. This high-bar thinking can frustrate even well-meaning friends and partners. They feel like they're being tested, like nothing is ever good enough, and when they finally realize they've fallen short, the INFJ has already checked out. It's important to remember that INFJs don't expect perfection. What they're really looking for is effort, growth, sincerity. When they see that, they're incredibly forgiving. But when they see laziness or dishonesty, their respect fades, and once it's gone, it's hard to get back. So if you're close to an INFJ, take their silence seriously. And if you are one, remember, not everyone can meet your expectations. But some people will rise if you give them a chance to understand what you need. Way number 5, they see hidden motives. Most people walk through life without worrying too much about the deeper layers of what others are doing. They hear what's said, they take it at face value, and they move on. But INFJs don't operate that way. They're always looking beneath the surface, trying to understand why people say what they say, act how they act, and avoid what they avoid. This habit of digging into motive can drive people up the wall. You might be trying to make a light comment, and the INFJ is asking what's really behind it. You might be avoiding a topic, and they point it out. You might be trying to put on a happy face, and they ask what you're not saying. It's like they refuse to accept things as they appear. And that's exactly right, they don't. INFJs are wired to search for the truth beneath the mask. They pay attention to inconsistencies, emotional shifts, and moments when something feels off. Even if you're saying all the right things, they'll sense the tension underneath, and they won't let it go. This makes people feel exposed. Not because the INFJ is trying to shame anyone, but because they see too much. They ask hard questions. They don't let you hide. And if you're not ready to deal with your own emotions or motives, that can feel invasive or even threatening. What's even harder is that INFJs usually are right. Not always, but often. Their gut feeling about what someone is hiding tends to be accurate. And that can leave people feeling frustrated or even angry, especially if they weren't ready to be seen so clearly. The INFJ's ability to read hidden motives can make conversations feel intense, even when they weren't meant to be. And that emotional intensity wears people down. They might start avoiding real topics. They might become defensive or shut down. Not because the INFJ is wrong, but because it's exhausting to feel that seen all the time. This insight comes from care. INFJs want to understand. They want to help. But their refusal to let things slide can make others feel uncomfortable, like there's no emotional hiding place. And while that can lead to deep connection, it can also drive people to their breaking point. Way number 6. They take time to process before reacting. ENFJs don't like to react in the moment. They're not quick to snap back, blurt things out, or argue on the spot. Instead, they go quiet. They think. They reflect. And sometimes they take hours, or even days, before they respond to something meaningful. This alone drives people absolutely insane. Most people are used to instant feedback. You say something, you expect a reaction. But with INFJs, that doesn't always happen. They might pause, nod, and say nothing. They might leave a message on read. They might seem like they don't care. But what's actually happening is much deeper. Inside their mind, they're sorting. They're running through what was said, how it made them feel, what it really means, and whether or not it's worth responding to. They're trying to figure out not just how they feel, but how the other person feels too. They don't want to say something they'll regret. They don't want to escalate. So they sit with it. To others, this looks like avoidance. It looks like coldness or passive aggression. But that's not what it is. It's internal processing, emotional filtering. And it's something INFJs absolutely need in order to feel clear. The frustration this creates is very real. Friends, partners, or co-workers might feel ignored or dismissed. They might interpret the silence as a lack of care or effort. And by the time the INFJ finally comes back with a response, the other person might already be tired of waiting or emotionally spun out. What makes this worse is that INFJs don't always explain why they're silent. They think it's obvious that they're thinking. But for people who value open dialogue or fast communication, this gap in time feels like emotional distance. It builds tension. It makes people wonder, are they upset? Are they judging me? Are they gone for good? And sometimes the INFJ never does respond. If they've processed something and decided it's not worth engaging with, they just move on, internally. That leaves the other person feeling confused, even abandoned. This tendency to pause, reflect, and then respond later is one of the most misunderstood INFJ traits. It's not meant to push people away. It's a way to make sure they respond with care instead of impulse. But without communication, that delay can drive people up the wall. For INFJs, the key is learning to say, I need time to think, but I'm not ignoring you. And for everyone else, it's learning that silence from an INFJ doesn't mean they're done. It usually means they're still deciding what to say next. Being close to an INFJ can feel like an emotional roller coaster. One moment, you're having a deep, meaningful conversation. The next, you're wondering what you said wrong. They can be warm and expressive, then suddenly withdrawn and unreadable. They ask deep questions, notice your energy, and seem to know what you're feeling before you do. And while all of that is powerful, it's also exhausting. This video wasn't about bashing INFJs. It was about understanding the emotional patterns that can frustrate people, even when the INFJ means well. These 6 ways INFJs drive others crazy don't come from a place of harm. They come from their depth, their empathy, their overactive minds, and their deep need to stay in alignment with who they are. If you're an INFJ, you don't need to apologize for being complex. But it helps to be aware of how your silence, your insight, or your emotional rhythms might affect others. A little explanation goes a long way. You don't have to change, You just have to let people in on what's going on inside you. And if you're close to an INFJ, try not to take it personally. They're not pulling away because they don't care. They're pulling away because they care so much. They need time to make sense of everything. They're not overanalyzing you to judge you. They're doing it to understand and protect the relationship. INFJs can be some of the most loyal, loving, and emotionally intelligent people you'll ever meet. But that same intensity can be overwhelming. So if you find yourself feeling crazy around them, take a breath. Ask questions. Give space. And above all, remember, they're not trying to frustrate you. They're just built differently. And sometimes, that difference is exactly what makes them unforgettable.